I'm super excited to partner with FX today to talk about their new show, Grotesquerie, premiering September 25th on FX and streaming on Hulu. In FX's Grotesquerie, Detective Lois, played by Niecy Nash Betts, investigates a series of unsettling crimes that feel eerily personal while also grappling with her strained family life and inner turmoil. With the help of Sister Megan, a nun and journalist with a difficult past, they uncover disturbing clues that entangled them in a sinister web of mystery. This show is executive produced by Ryan Murphy and also stars Courtney B. Vance, Leslie Manville, and Travis Kelce. And with a cast like this, it's impossible not to get excited. Courtney B. Vance always brings such a gravitas to his roles, and seeing Travis Kelce step into this dark and chilling world is something I can't wait to experience. I'm a huge fan of horror shows that mix mystery and personal drama, and Grotesquerie looks like it will do exactly that. The eerie atmosphere and intriguing character dynamics already has me hooked. Check out the trailer right now.
Something hellish is here. This killer is someone who knows anatomy. The blood, the DNA, it was left there for us to find. It's like God left the keys to the candy store to the devil.
Detective, you have an entire family murdered.
Think of the worst thing you could never unsee.
This is evil.
So you're the nun who's a journalist covering crime?
I'm interested in rituals, cults, and their place in American life.
You have to really hate people to do what was done here. It's inhuman. No, it's unhuman.
It's better to look at the evil than to ignore it, Father.
And what if you enjoy the looking?
They're playing with us, hunting us.
Seems like this killer is taunting you.
I am trying to stay sharp, but I'm losing it. You're in an alcoholic's haze.
God knows what darkness you let in.
This is the end of time. The monster is out here, people.
There's no future after this.
It's a messy thing. A dirty, nasty thing.
People want evil.
I get a shiver in my quiver just thinking about it.
During the summer of 1975, my grandfather worked at a car dealership as a mechanic in a major city on the West Coast. That was where my Aunt Cece got her first job as a receptionist for the dealership. They were from a small town out in the countryside, so she was excited to start work in the big city as Cece had just graduated high school and wanted to save up for an apartment. Despite the fact that she was in a major city, Cece's job was what you'd expect working as a receptionist inside a car dealership. The immediate area was devoted to industry work and other car dealerships. It was, in effect, a social dessert for a 17-year-old social butterfly like Cece. This was a blue-collar area that was predominantly dominated by men working hard and dirty jobs. And despite that, Cece enjoyed her work and the chance to carpool with her dad and get along great with the staff with what my grandfather called the gift of gab. She could make friends with anybody. And now, as it was 1975, most transactions were done in cash, and as a result, paperwork and money deposits had to be done with daily trips to the bank. That task fell upon Cece as part of her duties, and she was entrusted with taking deposits to the bank located within walking distance of her place of employment. As she worked in a successful car dealership, she could deliver thousands of dollars in cash per deposit. To put the money in perspective, $2,000 in 1975 equivalates to well over $10,000 USD based on today's inflation rates. And so here was Cece, a lone 17-year-old girl with a daily routine, walking from a popular car dealership to a bank with large sums of money at a somewhat isolated and rough neighborhood inside a major city. To say that her employer did not foresee an opportunity for disaster was naive on their part, and for my grandfather as well. All that I can say about that relaxed attitude was that the 70s was an entirely different world almost 50 years ago, and Cece was the one to pay the price. On that summer's day, the dealership had quite a few successful transactions that resulted in netting over $3,000. So, with the paperwork done after lunchtime, Cece put the money into her purse and began the short walk to the bank. She was a few minutes into her journey when a rusty van screeched to a halt behind her. Before she could react, the sliding door opened and a man pulled her inside. The door slammed shut and the engine revved as they sped off. And just like that, she was kidnapped. Inside the van were 5 rough-looking men in their mid to late 20s. The back seats had been removed to make room for a mattress and several pillows, converting it into a sort of party van, as was typical for the time. And this was evident from the empty beer cans, bottles, and drug paraphernalia scattered around. The men laughed as they shoved Cece onto the mattress, commenting that they had wanted a pretty girl to join the party. She had the misfortune of being the random girl in their path. They seemed either oblivious or uncaring that they had abducted a young woman against her will. There's no need to emphasize how dangerous a situation Cece was in here. She was fully aware of what was likely to happen with 5 male strangers taking her to God knows where. These men didn't look like college students. Their rough appearance suggested a very harsh lifestyle. Cece also realized that they were unaware of the money in her purse. These were men looking for a good time at the expense of an innocent woman, not criminal masterminds who had planned to rob her of the $3,000 hidden in her purse. Still, her chances of survival would likely plummet to 0 if they discovered the cash, and that amount might be too tempting to leave behind a witness. Cece then did what she did best. She kept her cool and turned on the charm. She laughed along with the men, as if being held against her will was just some joke, saying something like, well, you guys seem pretty cool. It's too bad I can't party with you since I'm expected back at work. I mean, I'd hate for all of us to get into trouble. My boss will be mad if I'm not back soon, and he'll definitely call the cops with what's been happening lately." At the time, the then unidentified serial killer Ted Bundy was active on the West Coast, particularly in that city. Cece and her sisters had even cut their hair short as a precaution because Bundy's targeted victims typically had long hair. These murders were at the forefront of the public's minds, and Cece used that as leverage to make their kidnappers take her word seriously. It was enough to plant a seed of doubt in their minds. Their intentions have never been good, but now they face the added risk of her being immediately missed and the cops quickly getting involved. Cece continued talking to the men as they mulled over this information, all the while downplaying her own fear. "You guys don't really want to do this, do you? My boss is really strict about my breaks, and we'll all get into trouble real soon. I don't think any of us would want that." In the end, those terrible men decided that she wasn't worth the trouble. They pulled over near a grocery store, opened the door, and let her out before quickly driving off. Cece, still clutching her purse with the $3,000, ran into the store to call her dad. The cops got involved, but without any identification or license plate, these kidnappers were never caught, and no follow-up was ever made. In retrospect, Cece's kidnapping might not have been taken seriously by the police. I mean, this was 1975, just 1 year after American women were even legally allowed to open their credit cards without a male partner. It's frustratingly likely that Cece's abduction would be written off as a harmless joyride prank since she was neither assaulted nor robbed. And, hopefully, those men thought better of trying again with another innocent bystander, but sadly, that might just be wishful thinking. Now, I want to end this story by saying how much I love my Aunt Cece and how grateful I am that she is a part of my life. She is an incredibly brave woman who has had many adventures traveling all over the world, doing photography and using her gift of gab to cultivate friendships that cross cultures and language barriers. I'm glad her narrow escape from abduction as a teenager did not diminish her adventurous spirit, but instead taught her how to survive in this very dangerous world. She has many stories, but she tells this one as a lesson in not becoming too relaxed in daily routines and in keeping emotions in check during frightening situations. In 2004, I was 24 and worked at Taco Bell. My manager was 18. It wasn't the best time of my life, but I digress. The manager and I became close friends. My little goth self and my jock altar boy manager were like the odd couple. He loved how I could talk to anyone and that my girlfriend was hot. I liked that he seemed more open and willing to be like a chameleon every time we hung out at the goth bar. He even went as far as to buy fishnet shirts for club nights. And as things happen, we had a falling out a couple of years into our friendship. He got fired from Taco Bell for harassment, which was pretty uncharacteristic. He thought he was close enough friends with one of the girls who worked nights with us to say, "Hey, while you're down there," when she kneeled to get cheese from the reach-in refrigerator. He got fired from his second job for altering inventory counts and stealing Gatorade crates from the gas station where he worked nights. And around this time, he decided to start working as a carpenter and began training for it. He bought all the necessary tools and started attending a vocational school to learn the trade. And soon, he was having fun hanging out into the wee hours of the night with his new friends from class, and by this point he was 21. One night while driving back from a bar, he was far too drunk to drive. He hit a median on the freeway, rolled his car, and broke his leg. The rent and cleaning fell to me. I wouldn't have minded, but he didn't even clean his dishes. There would be mold in the sink. These were dishes that I bought, and I told him that if he couldn't wash them, he should just use paper plates, and I ended up throwing the plates out. After he healed up and started working as a contractor, he began bringing friends over for loud parties while I was always trying to sleep in the other room. He would be drunk as hell, and we would fight, mostly arguments, though he did throw a bottle at me once. It was so violent that I decided to just move out and go back home. A few years had passed, and in 2012, I graduated from college and moved to northern Wisconsin to work at a TV station. While having breakfast at a restaurant with my girlfriend, I got a text message from a friend back home asking what my old roommate's last name was. I told him, DeHunt, and sent a picture. "Is this him?" he asked. "Yep," I texted back. And then he sent me a picture of the whole newspaper, and I almost threw up. There was the church kid, and carpenter turned thief's mugshot. He had just been convicted of murdering his girlfriend. And the story goes like this. He was dating a woman who worked at the courthouse as a clerk. She had never missed a day of work and suddenly missed 3 days with no call and no show. Her boss, a retired detective, called in a wellness check. When they went to her house, Will answered the door and held his hands out in front of him in a sort of handcuff me pose. And they did just that and looked inside. What they found was something out of a Rob Zombie script. The drywall was recently patched, and the house had been cleaned. They peeled back the drywall patch and found black contractor bags with pieces of his skinned girlfriend inside. He had gotten drunk with her and they fought. He threw an ashtray at her, hitting her in the head. She fell and smacked her head on the counter. Panicking, he decided the best thing to do was strangle her to death and cut her into pieces in the basement with his sawzall. And that wouldn't do. On garbage day, people could see that it was a person, and so he used an X-Acto knife to skin the pieces, put them into the wall, and patched it up. I really did dodge the bullet. I could have been the first victim if I didn't move out of the way of his beer bottle that he threw at me so long ago. To start off, this is a bit longer. I thought about sharing some of these stories before, but recently some things have happened that I need to get off my chest. I work at a data destruction company. We provide large trash bins to our clients, which they fill with any sensitive information they want to destroy. Our truck drivers pick up the bins, and then we separate the paper from any trash or folders. There's also a loading dock where anyone can bring items. After that, everything goes to the shred floor, which is where I work. These shredders are large and can destroy up to 2 tons of paper a day. Now, sorry for the logistics, but it's hard to tell this story without explaining how it all works. Fortunately, no, this isn't a story about some horrific shredding accident, but I digress. As you can imagine, the documents we destroy are considered sensitive or classified, even if it's just junk mail. Bank statements, medical records, school papers, court records, pretty much anything you can think of. 90% of the stuff I see daily is boring and isn't worth looking at for more than the time it takes to throw it into the shredder. But there's some interesting stuff too. In the 4 months I've worked here, I've seen social security cards dating back to the 30s or 40s, report cards from the 50s, rosary beads, religious pamphlets from the 40s, which you can guess are very sexist, condoms, thankfully unused, a family photo album from the 70s full of photos from a trip to Disneyland, and even cash, the largest sum being $11,000 that a family unknowingly dumped after their mother passed away. And with an amount this high, we found the family and returned the money, and most cash gets thrown into a fund for a Christmas party for the employees. These are just mildly interesting things in what is largely a lot of extremely boring material. However, there's also a darker side to what we're destroying. No one ever thinks about what happens to things like crime scene photos or autopsy reports after they're no longer needed. Well, you guessed it. They end up with me at the shredder. I'm not a stranger to gore or dark subject matter. I'm submitting this to the subreddit after all, but some things you just can't shake off. Experience number 1. One time I was sorting through heaps of paper with a coworker when something caught our eye. A big folder had spilled its contents, and there in front of us was a stack of about 20 pages, each containing a full-color page-sized image that told a story. It was a warehouse setting, with a big red container that appeared to be full of ashes. As we went through the photos, we saw him. Among the ashes was a highly visible vest, and in the vest was the charred body of a man. From what we could tell, this man had fallen or been pushed into an incinerator. The aftermath showed him burnt to a crisp, with close-up photos of his genitalia, face, hands, and burst abdomen exposing his intestinal tract. Experience number 2. Since we sort out all the trash from the paper, we end up with big bins of nothing but garbage. We're talking folders, binders, glossy advertisements, printed photos, VHS tapes, CDs, Polaroids, you name it. These items still contain sensitive information, so they need to be destroyed separately to avoid mixing them with our recyclable material. So, every once in a while we have trash shredding days. Trash days are my favorite because that's where the cool stuff is found. So I'm enjoying the trash shredding when I come across some plastic pages with slots for Polaroids, and think of this like a sleeve for Pokemon cards. I look at the Polaroids, and it takes me a moment to realize I'm staring at a torso full of stab wounds. There were a dozen or so Polaroids, each showing a different murder victim. Gunshot wounds, people who had taken their own lives, slit throats, accidents. 2 of them stand out the most. One was a woman who had fallen backward off a stepladder and was internally decapitated when she hit the wall behind her. The fact that this was just some freak accident was both humbling and disturbing. The other was a fully nude woman whose head was wrapped in duct tape, with her feet and hands also restrained. The only part of her face visible is from her forehead to the bridge of her nose. A look of terror and pain froze in her eyebrows. There are many other things I've seen here that have haunted me, but Maybe I'll share those another time. One of the hardest parts for me is feeling like I can't tell many people about it. I never expected that a paper shredding job would put me face to face with such a dark side of humanity. I'm 31 and female, and although I may not be considered old to tell you this story, I have to take you back several years. At the time of this incident, I was 24. I was working for a popular convenience store chain in my area and had managed to climb up the promotional ladder to assistant manager. Often, I was the closing manager on duty, which typically wasn't an issue. I was employed in a suburban area of North Carolina, and my store didn't close until 10 p.m. I had worked plenty of closing shifts despite the climbing crime rate in my area. I considered myself someone who could handle things on my own. But one night, that confidence was shattered, because until you actually have to handle yourself, you truly don't know if you can. I came into work that Friday at my usual start time of 3 p.m. and was scheduled to close. My last employee shift ended at 8 p.m. Typically, after that time, there was nothing much to do in the store except for front-facing, cleaning, and other closing duties. And once those were finished, I usually spent my free time on my phone until it was time to lock up and clock out. Part of the closing duties involved taking the trash out to the dumpster behind the store. This night was no different. Aside from the creepy darkness, the back lot was illuminated by a single light in the parking lot. I had never had any issues taking out the trash, and none of my employees had ever reported any problems either. But this night would prove to be very different. As I approached the dumpster and threw in the bags of trash, I heard a squelching sound. To me, it sounded like an animal possibly eating something, maybe another animal. So I grabbed a long stick, planning to hit the side of the dumpster and scare away whatever was there. I stepped to the side and peeked around the back corner of the dumpster, and that's when I made eye contact with a man crouched down. He was looking over his shoulder with a knife in his teeth. As we locked eyes, he continued to saw into something, producing a lot of blood. Not wasting any time, I maintained eye contact with him as I slowly backed away. He grinned, the knife still between his teeth, and began to stand. I still had no idea what he was sawing into. Honestly, I didn't want to find out, and still locking eyes with him, I backed away faster, calculating when to turn and run for my life back into the store. About halfway through the back lot, the man, now on his feet, began walking toward me. When I decided to run, it was like he read my mind. He charged at me. I took off with every bit of speed I could muster, reaching the back door of the store just as he got there. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and set the alarm. Shaking, I pulled out my phone and called the police. All the while, this stranger was banging on the door, yelling in some strange language that I'd never heard before. About 20 minutes later, I was hiding between the aisles in the store because the entire front of the store was made of glass and he could see me if he looked in. Then, I heard a tapping sound on the glass door. At first, I froze, thinking it was the man with the knife. But soon, an officer announced his presence, and slowly I crept out of my hiding spot and saw 3 local police officers with flashlights. I went to the door and let them in. As we made our way to the back of the store, I explained that the guy had stopped banging and yelling a while ago. I didn't think that he was still there, but there was no way that he could have cleaned up everything behind the dumpster in that short period of time. I turned off the alarm and unlocked the back door for them to go outside, and curiosity got the best of me, and I followed, eager to see what they would find. One of the officers asked me to point to where I had seen the man. I pointed to the only dumpster in the lot, explaining that he was crouched behind it, sawing into something that was producing a lot of blood. And just as I finished explaining, another officer shone his light on the asphalt and said, "Oh, y'all gotta take a look at this." We could all make out the clear impressions of bare human footprints in what seemed to be a brownish-red liquid leading across the lot toward the store and fading out about halfway back. Perhaps to rule out the possibility of some cruel joke, 2 officers pointed their flashlights at my feet, confirming that I was indeed wearing my non-slip black work shoes and had no blood on me. Approaching the dumpster, one officer positioned himself in front of me while the others drew their weapons. One of them shouted in a very stern voice, "Police officer, if you're back there, show yourself. Come out with your hands up." And there was no response. As they turned the corner, they all sighed in unison, and what they found was a pool of blood, a knife, but no person. There was no animal or body, just blood, and a lot of it. They cordoned off the scene with yellow crime scene tape and began gathering some evidence, eventually allowing me to leave after giving my statement. The man behind the dumpster was apprehended a couple of days later from what I heard in his own home, which was only a few miles from the store. He was arrested and questioned, and after hours of interrogation, the man admitted to abducting and killing a child from his trailer park. What I witnessed was the dismemberment of this child. His pursuit of me was to ensure that if I had seen something, I wouldn't be able to talk about it. After the incident, I refused to close the store again, and my store manager agreed. Not long after, I took a position at another store within the same company in what seemed to be a safer area. I have been into urban exploration, or urbex for short, for a couple of years now. Living in Europe, specifically Germany, there are always reasonably nearby sites to visit. I started by venturing into well-researched urbex areas with my friends. At the time, I was a teenage girl who was afraid to explore alone, afraid of being assaulted, kidnapped, mugged, or murdered. Eventually, after about a year of urbexing with friends, I decided I was competent enough to explore on my own. I had become knowledgeable about what safety measures to take, for instance, wearing equipment like masks when entering old buildings due to the likelihood of asbestos particles being present. One should also wear thick clothes and sturdy shoes to avoid stepping on or bumping into anything sharp and harmful. I always scoped out the buildings and pre-planned entry and exit routes. Additionally, I shared my location with one of my closest friends every time I went on an adventure. I had successfully urbexed several times alone and covered many abandoned places across eastern Germany. However, in July 2018, things went very wrong. It was the peak of summer, and because I had explored almost all the places near me, I had to resort to more tedious methods of finding new spots. I began researching bunkers that were used in various wars in Germany, especially during World War II. I came across one in the depths of a forest about a 3-hour drive from my city. I was quite certain it would be there, and when I arrived, it was. I was over the moon, and I felt like a real explorer uncovering ancient artifacts. The bunker was made entirely of concrete on the outside and showed no signs of vandalism, so I assumed no one else had found it. It took me almost an hour to find a way in. I fiddled with the door, banged rocks against it, and prayed until it finally cracked open, and it was almost too easy. I turned my headlamp on and was wearing a mask and gloves for extra protection. Even through the mask, the smell was foul, as if something had just died inside. The interior was surprisingly large, and the floor was littered with papers and trash. What began to freak me out was in one of the sleeping quarters, I found a pillow that was slightly ripped open, and when I picked it up, I realized it was filled with hair. Human hair, I think. This filled me with dread as I immediately assumed it was the hair of Jewish prisoners from long ago, and I began to think of the horrors they experienced. I suddenly wanted to leave, but I forced myself to stay as I didn't want to drive 3 hours for nothing. When I pulled my eyes away from the pillow and scanned the room, I noticed something strange and out of place. It was an eaten can of beans with a plastic spoon in it. The paper can wrap was still vibrant. I carefully picked it up to examine it and read the expiry date, July 11th, 2018. I was a bit freaked out, but I chalked it up to someone else exploring this place before me. However, as I continued exploring, I started to see more signs of modern life. Food packaging, decent clothes, an air freshener can. The rotten smell became more pungent as I walked around. As soon as I entered the next room, I was hit by a putrid smell that made me feel sick. As I recovered, I began to look around the room and almost jumped when I saw 3 bodies. The first thought that rushed into my head was that this place was occupied by squatters, but clearly, they were dead. It was a heavy-set old man, a woman of similar age, and very distressingly, a small boy, maybe 9 years old. Their bodies were swollen, and their skin was purple and waxy. They didn't look human. The older man was lying on his back, his stomach mutilated, wearing only khaki trousers. The image of his entrails, dehydrated and almost black in color, still haunts me. The woman was completely naked and covered in bruises. There was blood on her private parts and her breasts had been cut off. Her face stared at me and I was horrified. And the poor child's face was unrecognizable. Dried brain matter and black blood covered him. I began to cry. I couldn't even breathe. Thousands of thoughts consumed my mind. What if the person who did this was close by? What if they found me? I would end up dead just like that poor family. I went to call the emergency services number for my country, but there was no service where I was. In my shock and terrified state, I decided to take photos of the scene before exiting the bunker as fast as I could. I didn't even bother shutting the door, I just ran. Much to my horror, I froze when I heard footsteps that were not mine. I crouched behind some fallen tree, though I could still see the bunker entrance if I jutted my head out, though I really didn't even dare to. I heard a male voice seething, and then yell, "I wasn't expecting visitors," in German before stomping into the bunker. I felt the biggest relief that he decided to forego scoping the area out first, and when I thought that he was deep enough into the bunker not to hear me, I ran as fast as my body could allow. I remember that the road was about a 30-minute walk from the bunker and ran for what felt like ages. As I saw the road, I heard a vicious scream and running behind me. Freaking out, hearing the crazed murderer chasing me, I put every ounce of survival I had into running for a few more minutes before finally crawling up to the road and to my car, which was about 200 meters from where I emerged. My keys were in my backpack and my shaky hands weren't helping me open the zipper. However, when I got them, I looked over and saw his figure climbing onto the road from the forest. He seemed to be about 60, was quite tall, maybe 180 centimeters, and very bulky. In his hand was a large knife that looked pretty well used, and I managed to get into my car and lock the doors just as he slammed into the window, banging on the glass, cursing at me, his crazed blue eyes wide and bloodshot. I started the ignition and drove over 140 kilometers per hour, well over the speed limit, though I didn't care. And looking back, I'm so grateful that he didn't think to slash my tires and instead was too focused on screaming at me. I stopped at the nearest petrol station and called my father, telling him everything. I arrived home and he met me there. I had only recently moved out, being just 20 years old, and we immediately went to the police and showed them the photos that I took, described the man, and gave them the coordinates of the place. They said that they would check the bunker out, but I never heard back. Since then, I have never done urbex again, and for a long time I couldn't go out alone. I even got therapy to deal with all that trauma, and to this day, over 5 years later, the images of those victims and the abuser's evil eyes and the sound of his rough, sinister voice still haunts my dreams. This happened about 20 years ago. I was 9 years old at the time, but my parents have also told me their side of the story on a bunch of different occasions. My parents are both biologists. They met at work, and from there it's been history. The place where they worked at the time was a government building dedicated to biology research used in government projects turned towards the public, meaning that they were the ones studying the environment and making environmental protection laws around their studies. This being a massive old government building, it always had a security guard present day and night. During the day, these security guards would mostly just stay at reception and greet people, but at night, they would do their rounds and make sure that there were no intruders because of all the science equipment and computers kept in the building. One of these guards is the let's not meet guy. Initially, he seemed like the nicest person. He was really nice to me, and frankly, all the memories I have from him before this were really nice. He would greet me and talk to me in the nicest way every time my parents brought me to work. He would make me paper planes, which he was surprisingly good at, and throw them around with me, and he would stay with me at reception in the days that my parents had to work into the night. Obviously, for me, that would get really boring, really fast, so he'd keep me company and entertain me. Mostly we would talk and play with the paper planes and watch TV, and it all seemed nice enough. Nice enough for my parents to trust him with me, which was probably their biggest mistake. One night, my parents had to work even later than usual. I think it was around 10 p.m., and they were still at it, so this guy, who was on the night shift, decided to take me around the building with him to do his rounds. We started on the top floor, checking all the rooms in the exterior part of the roof. Every room was so dark that I'd always stay a little behind and wait for him to turn on the lights, and then we stepped down to the second floor where my parents' office and labs were. We checked the opposite side of the building, going into labs with massive extractors, microscopes, and every kind of a science equipment you might think of. We walked down the stairs to the first floor, where most of the administration rooms were. I still remember seeing some maps on the walls and embalmed fish everywhere serving as decorations. First floor was all clear, so it was time to check the 2 basement levels. I thought it would have made sense to check the labs on the right side first, as the left side had a flight of stairs at the end leading up to where my parents were, but for some reason, he decided that we go check that side first. We checked all the labs, but I noticed his pace was accelerating and he was starting to look and sound happier, excited even. Once again, we checked all the labs, all the corners from one end to the other, turning the lights on ahead of us and turning them off behind us when we left. When we got to the last area, he turned all the lights on and we went inside. There were 3 separate offices on each side of the lab, and on the first one, he hurried towards the printer, opened it up, and took out 2 pieces of paper and made 2 quick paper airplanes. And that's when everything changed. He picked up one of the planes, went outside of the office, and threw it toward the end of the room. And then he told me the one he just threw was mine, and that we could throw them around in there. I ran to the other side of the room to pick up my plane, excited to play with it, and suddenly the lights went off. When I turned around to check what was happening, I saw him getting out of the lab, turning the lights off and locking the door. I ran to the door, punched it, and kicked it while screaming for him to open, panic taking over me because of how scared I was of being in the dark at the time. And through the glass in the door, I could see him scurrying away in the corridors, turning the lights off as he went and disappearing after turning a corner. I'm pretty sure that everything I felt and every shadow and creepy monster I saw in there while waiting was part of my imagination because of how scared I was. I balled up against a corner and could see shadows moving around me in the dark. I could only cry, lost without knowing what was happening and why he was doing that. My parents finished work eventually, and when they did, they packed up their things and made their way to the lobby to pick me up and go home. When they got there, the security guard was at reception, but I was nowhere to be found. And they panicked, of course, and must have shouted 100 different cuss words at the guy, and I'm not sure how my dad didn't murder him right then and there. But when they first asked the guy where the hell I was and what he had done with me, he simply said that he had gone to do the rounds with me and that I must have gotten lost somewhere. This is a building that would take you about an hour and a half to check from top to bottom, even if you're rushing, so must have gotten lost somewhere is not exactly helpful. They looked for hours without finding me. It was only when I saw a light far at the end of the corridors leading to the lab I was in that I got the courage to stand up, rush to the door, and start punching it as hard as I could. They finally found me there and made the guard unlock the door and get me out. I don't really remember sleeping that night, and if I did, it must have been out of exhaustion, but I know I made my mom stay in the bedroom with me that entire night. Of course, my parents made a complaint against the guard, and when they did, and the guy started being investigated, he was fired and arrested. Not because of locking me away, where he probably hoped no one would find me, but because he had been partnering up with other criminals to steal computers and equipment from the building to sell it in some shady market along with information in the hard drives and make money off of that. But then, he had stolen a lot of old computers without anyone realizing, and who knows what his plans were for me that night. I'm not convinced that locking a crying child in the middle of the darkness, hidden away in some room, is exactly the most normal behavior if you're not trying to hide them and come get them later when everyone has left and sell them as part of your product. I work at a big retail store as a self-checkout host. Most of my days are spent walking laps and listening to customers saying things like, "I don't work here," or "Why aren't you on the register?" And I understand their frustrations. Usually, there would be 2 or 3 of us at the self-checkout and maybe 2 manned registers open. We got a new guy in, we'll call him Terry. Terry always wore a mask since 2021, and COVID was still a concern to him. I was training him, telling him to stock candy in bags, and he asked the usual questions anyone would ask. If I was in school, if I had a girlfriend, I lived in a small city/big town that had a good college, students from all over the country would come and usually end up working at the prisons or in retail. I usually asked the same questions back. I told him no to both accounts. Then he asked if I ever went hunting. We had a lot of woods and a big forest around the town. "No, I don't like guns," I said. He replied that he'd have to take me one day. A few days went by and he was over on my side again. He asked if I had family in town and if they didn't, whether they lived close. I lived 3 doors down from my mother, and he started talking about hunting again and how he went out with his buddies and started using pack tactics, where they would box in the prey and finish it off. It sounded strange for deer, considering they usually flee at the first sight of noise. He was off for a few days because new hires often have problems getting hours during the first 3 weeks. I talked to one of my coworkers, and they told me that he asked a lot about me. The next time I saw him, his questions were pretty telling. "How tall would you say you are? How much do you weigh? How well do you know the woods past such and such street?" I'm a pretty big guy, 6 feet, 300 pounds, and when he brought up hunting again, a creepy thought sent a chill down my spine. Come on, man, you'd like it. Just some good old boys shooting the breeze late at night in the middle of the woods. And then the real fun starts right before dawn. They won't know what hit them. The mask hid most of his face, but I could see it rise when he smiled. I don't know why he thought that would be a great way to convince someone. Aside from feeling like they were about to hunt me, it sounded like I would have been bored out of my mind beforehand, and I must have made a face or something because he turned and walked away quickly. I told a couple of coworkers about it, but that was his last day, and I never saw him again, and I just hope that we never meet again. It was the summer of 1978, and we had just moved from Canada to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. As a 7-year-old child, I was excited about moving to a new country and the adventures that awaited me. Little did I know that one of my first adventures would be so sinister. We ended up staying at the Hilton Hotel with other expat families while we waited for the company's supplied home to be ready for us to move into. As a second grader, staying in a hotel for 1 to 2 weeks was exciting and felt like a luxurious camping trip. Since other expat families were also staying at the hotel, I had plenty of other children to play with. One of the games we played was hide and seek, which meant using the elevator to hide on the other 30-some floors or in the stairwells. The hotel gave us children a very false sense of security. One day, while we were playing hide and seek, I took the elevator alone to the top floor of the building. I believe it was the 30th floor. When I exited the elevator and rounded the corner, I ran into a man and a woman. They appeared to be in their late 30s and looked native to the country. I recall they did not look frightening and were dressed nicely, and despite their normal appearance, their actions immediately suggested otherwise. The man tried to grab my arm, but I pulled away. I backed away from the couple until we were standing about 10 to 15 feet apart. I was on the verge of turning and running, but I understand that there was nowhere to go if a pursuit ensued. A short standoff began. I assumed the man wanted to convince me to come with them willingly because if I screamed, it could attract the attention of other guests on that floor. And so, from about 15 feet away, we stared each other down. I was standing closest to the bank of elevators, and they were standing between me and the stairwell. The man took a chocolate bar out of his pocket and held it out to me. This, of course, would require approaching them to take it, and there was no way I was going to do that. The man and woman was staring at me with creepy fake smiles, and their body language screamed, "We may lunge at you at any moment." As a side note, I remember the chocolate bar had nuts in it, and I hated nuts and chocolate bars. When it became clear that I wasn't going to approach them, I noticed the man's stance shift to, "I am about to lunge at you," and my stance shifted to, "I think it's time to run." Just as it seemed that the man was about to lunge at me, the elevator doors dinged, and someone got off on that floor. I don't remember who it was or what they looked like, because as soon as I heard that sound, I turned and bolted past that person into the open elevator doors. I recall that the man and woman retreated in the opposite direction, perhaps to their room or the stairwell. I never told anyone what happened until decades later, and as a child, I quickly pushed it to the back of my mind until I was much older. It is sobering how the smallest things in life can be so life-changing. I don't remember who got off on that floor, but I remain eternally grateful to them. This happened when I was back in high school. It was a Wednesday night, and usually on Wednesdays, I would have youth group at my church, and my mom would have date night with her mom where they'd go play cards, watch TV together, etc., and this would mean that they might be gone till about 9 or 9:30 every Wednesday night. For whatever reason, both of us decided to stay home this night. I was downstairs in my mom's room in the basement watching TV with her. We also had a roommate at this time, and Cinnamon was his dog. The roommate was gone this night. He was kind of a night owl, so when he was gone, Cinnamon would sleep with one of us. I slept on a full-sized futon frame at this time, so even though it was a tight fit for myself and a big old pit bull, I always took the opportunity to have her sleep with me. She was, and still is, a great dog. It was about 8:30. Keep in mind, we usually wouldn't be home at this time, and our roommate was not home either, and I decided to head to bed. The way our house was set up was you'd go up a set of stairs, hit a landing, and then go up another set of stairs, and you'd be looking through the kitchen and living room, and you could see the front door. So Cinnamon and I are walking up the stairs to my room when we hit the landing. As soon as we do, Cinnamon barks a loud bark and books it up the other flight of stairs. I look up and see her booking it through the kitchen, and as I do, our front door bursts open, swings wide, and hits the wall. And I see a man in all black, with his hood up and black gloves on, running out the doorframe, through our porch and entryway, down our front steps and away on the sidewalk. Cinnamon stood barking at our screen door to our porch. It was a fast, loud, shocking event, and it was winter, and pitch black, so I didn't see much else because it was dark and it happened so fast. But I ran over and slammed the front door and locked the deadbolt, and then took Cinnamon and went to my room and locked my bedroom door. I called my mom and told her what happened from upstairs, and she told me to lock the door and stay in my room. That night I didn't sleep much. I was keeping an eye out for any noise or footsteps outside my window, and I swore I heard some things, but ultimately nothing else happened. I spent the night snuggled up to Cinnamon, thanking her for protecting me and being a scary pit bull, even though she was always so gentle, and I'll never forget that. So for context, my mom took a job years ago at a local laundromat because we knew the owner and needed extra money. I was around 10 when she got the job, and she allowed me to come with her because she would give me a little allowance for helping her do small tasks. I ended up going with her every night for years, and as I got older, I mainly went to make sure that my mom was safe because I was worried about her. We regularly dealt with angry customers refusing to leave, most of which were drunk or high, and we had to call the police a few times. My mom was always worried about me tagging along, but I insisted, and to this day I still can't say I regret it. A lot of good came out of it, mainly the work experience, and that made up for how intense it could be. I have a lot of interesting stories from that time, but this one takes the cake for the most horrifying, and it took place when I was about 12. Being the young and dumb kid that I was, I designated myself the job of chasing people off when it was closing time. We would have people parking behind the building pretty regularly, so I would walk to the side of the building and start yelling that they were now trespassing, and I'd call the cops if they didn't leave. I felt that this is important to bring up because I now realize that I let any shady person hanging around the building at night know of my presence, and that's a dangerous thing to do when you're a 12-year-old girl. I was blissfully unaware that anything could happen to me until one night when we showed up to find that the door lock had been broken. My mom had unlocked the building that morning, so it wasn't like this was a break-in attempt since it had been unlocked all day. We were a bit shaken up, but my mom texted her boss to let him know about it and just told me to tell her if I saw anyone pull up. About 30 minutes after, I finished my few tasks and sat down to draw in my sketchbook. I had barely been sat down for a few minutes when I heard the door swing open, which startled me because normally people just knock when they see the very obvious closed sign. My mom noticed it too and yelled out that we were closed. I heard an older man's voice respond, explaining that he had just come in to use our drink machine. We normally let people in to use our snack and drink machines, so my mom told him that he had a few minutes and went back to the closet to grab something. I was sat at about 7 feet away from the drink machine, so I heard him walk up, but didn't really pay much attention to him. I continued to draw until I started getting the feeling that someone was watching me, and realized that I didn't hear this guy put any money into the drink machine. I nervously glanced to my left and saw a tall man in his mid-60s staring right at me with this very big smile on his face. I jumped a little, but forced an awkward smile back at him and directed my attention back to drawing. As soon as I did this, I heard what sounded like shuffling, and when I looked over again, and he was closer, I didn't know what to do, so I tried to just not look at him. But every time I would look away, he would shuffle closer. His body was still facing the drink machine, but his neck was craned in my direction, and he wouldn't stop smiling and staring. I began shaking, panicking, and my eyes were darting back and forth between him and the closet door while I tried to plan a fast escape. I went to reach for my knife in my bag because I couldn't even imagine this man's intentions, and quickly realized that it was not there. I had left my knife at home when I needed it the most, and I was petrified. I decided to just stare back at him, despite being terrified, trembling violently, and after what felt like an eternity, he suddenly broke eye contact and yelled to my mom to have a good night, before turning around and walking out. Relief hit me instantly, and I tried to calm myself down after what had just happened. I thought I was finally safe and started to get up to splash some water on my face when I saw him sit down on the bench outside. Panic and dread hit me like a brick, and I sprinted into the closet to hide. I filled my mom in on everything, and she told me to run to the car and she'd get between me and him and pepper spray him if needed. I did as she told me and ran to the car, and as I passed him, he stood up and began walking toward the car. My mom yelled at him to get away from her car, and his reaction was to try to calmly start a conversation about the make and model of her car while staring right at me. She ignored him, hopped in the car, locked us in, and started backing up as quickly as possible. I ducked down in my seat, but could still see him standing there, and I know that he could see me because I watched as he lifted his hand and waved me goodbye before walking around to the back of the building and disappearing into the darkness. I felt sick. I couldn't sleep that night, and I never dared set foot anywhere near the back of the building again, so I guess that was a lesson learned. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, you should submit them over at letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. If you want to support me even more, though, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered from members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, don't forget to empty your pea turtle.